In this video, we're going to discuss unsaon pag-graph kang cosecant ug secant functions which are the inverses of the sine and the cosine functions. So take note that the cosecant is the inverse of our sine, while the secant is the inverse of our cosine function. So magamit natin yung information in order to graph these functions easily. So first, let us consider graphing y is equal to cosecant x. So proceed to our table of values in here. We have the values of x, which are the measure of the angles in radian forms. We have the values of y is equal to sine x. So na-obtain natin yung mga values from our unit circle as discussed in the previous video. And as you noticed, the values of y is equal to cosecant x is just the inverses or the reciprocal of the values of our sine x, since we know that cosecant x is just equal to 1 over sine theta or 1 over sine x. So therefore, in getting the values of y equals cosecant x, ato lang kuhaon ang reciprocal sa values ni sine x. So we have 0. 0 is represented as 0 over 1. So if you're going to get its reciprocal, mahimo na siyang 1 over 0. And 1 over 0 is undefined since wala man tayo denominator nga dapat 0. No, so this is undefined. So our 1/2 becomes 2. Our 1 is still 1. 1/2 becomes 2. 0 is undefined. We have negative 1/2, negative 2, negative 1 is still negative 1, and our negative 1/2 becomes negative 2, and our 0 is undefined. Now, ang pinaka-importante ani is to take note of the x values kung asa nag-undefined ang values atong function, which is si cosecant x. So, the values of our x kung asa nag-undefined is we have x is equal to 0, x is equal to pi, and x is equal to 2 pi. So, these values, kung asa nag-undefined ang values ni cosecant x, mao ni siya ang mga vertical asymptotes nato. So, let us look at the graph in here. So, the first step in graphing the cosecant x is to graph first the y equals sine x. So, i-graph na nato ang y is equal to sine x, and we know that it has a period of 2 pi. Tama? Diba? In our previous discussion. And so, now that we know that 0, pi, and 2 pi, then ako dali, 0, pi, and 2 pi, as you can see, 0, si pi, and si 2 pi, their values of y equals sine x is 0. And now, if you're going to graph y is equal to cosecant x, ato lang na siyang duwingan og imaginary line or broken line, which signifies the horizon, the vertical asymptotes. So recall that kung natay asymptotes, the graph must not touch the asymptotes, no? Di dapat siya mo lapas, mo agi, or mo touch. So, it will look like this. Here and here. So, we have, if pi over 6, we have 1/2. Ang value sa atong, we have 2, the value of our cosecant x. If our x is pi over 2, the value of our cosecant x is 1 and 2. So our first graph of the cosecant x is going upward, and here it's going downward. So as you notice, no, kung makita ninyo, nag-agad lang siya kung asa dapit ang curve, no? Kung asa ang curve, dito pud siya sa ibabaw sa curve pud siya mo open or sa opposite sa curve niya. So the same as this one. So, man-notice na to that the domain of the sine x or the domain of our cosecant x is those belongs to the real numbers where sine x must not be equal to 0. So, therefore, dapat dili 0 si sine x. Kaya mahimo man siya undefined kung 0 ang value si sine x. Diba? Kaya kung i-reciprocal na to, undefined man siya. So thus, take note that the domain of our cosecant x is a set of real numbers where x must not be equal to k pi, where k is an element of an integer. Well, meaning, the multiples of pi are the exemptions as the domain of our y is equal to cosecant x, because as you can see, dali siya nag-undefined dito as na 2 pi, pi. We also have 3 pi, 4 pi. Dali apod kung ato siyang i-extend in the negative direction, negative pi, negative 2 pi, and so on. And this is applicable in our graph y is equal to cosecant x. Our graph looks complicated but actually easy lang kaayo siya i-graph, especially if na-master na nimo kung unsaon pa graph ang atong y equals sin x and y is equal to cosine x. We have different levels of equations, no, natoy y is equal to a sin bx, y is equal to a sin b times the quantity of x minus c, and we have y is equal to a sin b times the quantity of x minus c plus d. So if na-master na to ninyo unsaon pag-graph, easy lang sa inyo pag-graph sa ilahang mga inverses, which is the secant and the cosecant functions. So to summarize the steps in graphing cosecant and secant functions, mo lang nitulo ang inyong dumduman. First, graph its inverse. So meaning, if cosecant ang gihatag, imo siyang balhinon ng equation into sine. If secant functions ang gihatag, ang una nimong i-graph is ang iyahang cosine. Next is identify the vertical asymptotes, which is very easy to know, and then sketch the graph na dayon ta. So let us have an example. The first example, sketch the graph of y is equal to 2 cosecant x over 2. So we have cosecant and the inverse is sine. So therefore, ang una niyong buhaton, inyo sa ning himuong y is equal to 2 sine x over 2, no? Himuon sa nimo na siyang y is equal to 2 sine x over 2. So gidiscuss na siya sa atong previous video, the steps and the process on how to graph the sine functions. So this is now the graph of y is equal to 2 sine x over 2. I will not show you anymore the process. It's up to you how to ikaw na lang mag-check sa imuhang self kung sakto ba na yung graph. Next is identify the vertical asymptotes. So ang clue, inig mag-identify ka sa vertical asymptotes bisan og wala pa ka nag table of values or based sa imong table of values in constructing this inverse of your equation. Tanawon lang nimo dito kung asa nag-zero ang values ni niya. Kay inig inverse na nimo, ma-undefine man siya. So look at the graph. Kung asa tong niagi siya sa x-axis. O kani si negative 2 pi, si 0 o kani si 2 pi. So kani siya ang ato ang mga vertical asymptotes. So sa graph, dali ra kay siya ma-identify kung kinsa lang to siya ang nag-touch sa atong x-axis, meaning the value of y there is 0 or the value of the function is 0. So we have then here. So the vertical asymptotes of y are the x-intercepts. Muna kong giingon sa inyo nga kung asa siya ni agi sa x-axis of the y equals 2 sine x over 2. So our vertical asymptotes are given as the multiples of 2 pi. So, kung ato na ni siyang i-graph dayon, knowing that we identified already the asymptotes, igo na lang dayon ka magbutang sa ibabaw o curve. No? Make sure nga dili siya mo touch dere. Okay, na-move naman hinoon. And here. Okay, dapat ha di siya mo touch. Kasi ilo ang akong figure, kay dili perfect. Okay, here the same. Makabulo naman dayon nga kung asa ka pa daw mo curve based lang sa iyang kurba, no? So we have here. So we have here. So in any yang dagway sa ato ang equation. So tan-aw na to dire. So okay. So this is now the graph of our y is equal to 2 cosecant x over 2. Take note ha nga ato lang na siyang gi-broken line ang graph sa ato ang inverse nga sine because ang ato man yung highlight is kaning yung red nga functions. So if you're going to graph in your paper, make sure nga naka-dash rapod na siya. Ayaw ninyo siya buo nga line. Kay malahi na pod iyahang meaning. This will just serve as a guide lang in graphing the cosecant or the secant functions.